Today on Talk About Your Community, the conundrum of the deskless worker. Join me as we talk to Brad Rooke from Igloo Software. Kalisa, let's roll the opening. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever in the world you may happen to be. You've tuned into Clocktower Advisors Talk About Your Community, where we meet with all sorts of interesting people who have a perspective on community building, online, offline, and my favorite, the hybrid in between. On today's show, we've got Brad Rooke, who is the Senior Customer Advocacy Manager with Igloo Software. He's been a guest on the show about a year ago and came on and talked a little bit about reducing digital friction and DEI initiatives in the online workplace. He is an expert in digital workplace, and we're going to have him on in just a second. Before we do, just wanted to welcome everybody who is a newcomer to the show. If you've never been on the live stream before, we like questions and comments during the course of the conversation. I'll often promote a question in the chat into the live screen here, so that my guest and I have an opportunity to respond to or encourage or react to the comments that you may have. So we love those kinds of interruptions. Also, if you are tuning into this on the replay, please add your comments and reflections. Try to respond to each and every person who says something in the stream. I want to celebrate, as we're entering into November here, that we're up to about 180 subscribers on our YouTube channel, which for me is a personal exciting win for Clocktower overall. It means that we have been producing a lot of shows over time, and people are finding value in them within our particular little niche of the world. I know I'm not a viral superstar by any stretch of the imagination, but it does feel good that I can do good for a few people and offer them some expert perspectives on the topic of community building and that approach. And while we're talking about the show, I will mention that we've got an upcoming guest, first-time guest for us on November the 15th. That's Friday, November the 15th, same time. Her name is Muj Ovali, and Muj is a performance marketing expert. And so I'm excited to be having her on. She's going to be talking about community growth hacks. And so that's going to be quite interesting. She's got a wealth of experience around things like identifying target audiences and understanding their needs, utilizing social media ads to reach potential community members. Like, how do you bring people into the community so you can start engaging them? Running referral programs and incentives to encourage word of mouth growth, leveraging partnerships and collaborations for community expansion, and tracking and analyzing growth metrics to optimize strategies. You're not going to want to miss that. I think it's going to be a highly practical show, and she's going to bring in all of her knowledge as a strategic performance marketing expert to help us out along all of our journeys. But that's in the future. We're here in the present, and for that, I would like to welcome in my guest and friend, Brad Rooke. Brad, welcome to the show again. Good to see you.
Hey, Todd, thanks for having me. And I really enjoyed that plug for the 15th. I'm going to have to make it a point to check that out. Sounds like a really interesting session coming up.
Yeah, Muj is a new friend, and I'm really looking forward to that conversation. Always good stuff coming along. And then I think in December we're going to try to do, and I think you joined this maybe last year or the year before. Yeah, maybe last year. We did sort of an ugly sweater day. Like, we all kind of came on and sort of hung out, talked about the community. We had a few people bounce in and out of that. You're definitely invited back. Would love to see you stop by for the party. Bring a cup of cocoa, wear your most garish sweater that you've got, and we'll have a lot of fun on that.
You know what is really funny about that is shortly after that, I was showing someone how to embed a YouTube artifact into a digital workplace, and I used that particular video. And I was actually logged into this environment I hadn't been in ages. It's just a demo environment of mine. Yeah. And lo and behold, there was your smiling face. So there you go. There you go.
Apologize for that. Yeah. That's great. So fun. Well, as I said, it's been about a year since we've had you on the show.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Last time around, we were talking again about sort of the digital workplace experience or digital communities for employees. And, of course, that's your area of expertise. And you've been with Igloo for some time. Before that, I know you were in corporate security.
Yeah,
Interesting career pivot, to kind of move into this space.
it was. Yeah.
For people who are meeting you for the first time, do you want to give just sort of a quick resume about what you do and how you ended up in the world of community building?
Sure, yeah. So my official title is Senior Customer Advocacy Manager, but I came to Igloo as a digital workplace consultant, working with our existing customers, and really kind of the tagline on the job is to help people love their igloos or love their digital workplaces, as the case may be. So that involves anything from strategy, analytics, best practices, working with them physically to change aspects of their digital workplaces, working with their executive teams to talk about KPIs, things like that, and just really strategizing with them to grow and advocate for the digital workplace within their organization, and of course, to derive some benefit from that with Igloo and create customer voices within our community. Prior to that, so you mentioned corporate security. Yeah, I was in corporate security. I was in actually horse racing security for years and years, many years, as first a frontline guard, and then I worked my way up to management and eventually training coordinator. But that took me. We were using software at the time to report incidents, and I ended up going to work for that software company. Is what took me to the corporate security world. And I made my bones for about 7 years as a corporate security consultant, helping folks implement that software. And then I was just offered the opportunity to get into Igloo. I'd used it before with this previous company, and I was like, I can either be a security consultant, and I'm very good at this, and I know I can do it. I'm a certified protection professional. I've got everything I need, and I can do this and be really content in my career, or I can pivot and see, what do I think about being able to do this? Can I become passionate about this? And I was incredibly surprised. I still am incredibly surprised. I've been with Igloo 5 years. I didn't anticipate being this passionate about this space that I'm working in now. I love just, the idea of digital transformation, digital employee experience, and it's just really opened new doors for me. And I love the way it touches the entire organization. Like when you're working with an organization, you're working with that entire organization. The entire organization is benefiting from what you're doing. And that was kind of a flip over corporate security. So anyway, pardon me, you asked for a quick download. I gave you a little bit of a longer one, but that's kind of where
all good. Well, and I'll say that your experience of serendipitously encountering the world of the community profession is a common experience, I think, for all of us that have found ourselves here. And I would say that we're luckier to have you, here as a result of that. In my work, I've straddled the world of external facing online communities and internal communities. I've worked on both as strategy implementations. And so I always feel like I've got an appreciation for that world, even though I don't live there full time.
Yeah.
Working with organizations to enable a better employee experience, enabling them with the right collaborative tools, the right information, the right ways to get work done in digital, remote, hybrid, kinds of situations is incredibly important to the modern workplace. We have. I'm wondering, it's been about a year since we've talked about this, and I know we want to get into that conversation about the deskless worker, because I think there's some very specific and very interesting use cases around that. But I guess sort of at a high level, hot take, what's been happening over the past year in the digital workplace? Anything new and exciting that's rolling out? I know we've had AI has sort of hit the world by storm within that period of time. So digital disruption is certainly a piece. A lot of organizations, mandating people going back to the physical workplace. I'm kind of wondering how that's impacted the way that Igloo has looked at things.
I think really a lot of it has to do with the idea of it just being the world of work is more dispersed and dare I say weird than it's ever been. We definitely have people working in all sorts of different areas. We've got different conundrums as far as the idea of I'm working from home, I'm working from remotely, I'm hybrid. Obviously the deskless worker charge is a big focus right now. Just the idea like 80% of the world's workers are deskless, and it's just the idea of how do we reach those folks. And how do we bring them into kind of wrap our arms around them within the digital employee experience framework to better understand their needs, to provide them with the tools to do their jobs, and to really make them a part of the organization that can succeed and thrive along with the larger organization. I mean, that's a big thing. AI for sure. AI is entering into all our conversations. I mean, I think on LinkedIn, I don't know how many posts I see on AI consistently. LinkedIn's offering to write my posts for me in AI now, so there's a lot of conversation around that. And certainly, it's something that's going to be very pervasive, and really it impacts different organizations in different ways. Some organizations have absolutely said, yep, we're all on board with AI, we're going to use it. Others are doing a lot more careful diligence to determine how they can use it, if they can use it, what data is being exposed, that sort of thing. And then you really get into, from there, just the idea of how different organizations are working and how they're orienting their digital workplaces to capture their goals, whether it's knowledge management, whether it's collaborations, communications, that sort of thing, and really kind of what the angle is. No two digital workplaces are the same, no two organizations are the same. So it's interesting to see those grow and thrive, and just to embrace those challenges as we're moving forward.
Great perspectives. We're talking to Brad Rooke, the Senior Customer Advocacy Manager with Igloo Software. And if you are tuning in here, please take a moment to drop into the comments, say hello where you're tuning in from. And if you've got any burning questions on your mind about the digital workplace experience, Brad is the guy to have conversations with about this. Brett, so you mentioned in that overview of what's been happening in the employee experience, that 80% of workers are now considered to be deskless. Is that right?
Yeah, that's I've seen that stat 3 or 4 times and done some research to back it up. And 80%. Yeah. So I mean, that's a huge portion of the workforce.
That's incredible. So what does that mean then for the way that organizations need to plan for enabling their employees? Like I can relate that some years ago, I did work for a logistics company. They had a lot of drivers out on the road. Yeah. And one of the things that they did, or that they were very concerned about as they were implementing a digital workplace for their employees, was they saw it as their top priority to make sure that the people who were out on the road, first and foremost, felt like this was for them. That it wasn't just for the people back home in the mothership, in the womb of the office, right? And so actually they implemented the platform first. They rolled out first to the deskless workers.
Absolutely, yeah.
Out there. Now that was years ago. So that was kind of an innovative, forward-looking way, to approach all of that. I'm kind of wondering how that's, what are the issues with deskless workers now? What are the kinds of things that you need to address?
Well, I think, for starters, one of the biggest issues with deskless workers is just that lack of information in a lot of cases. They don't have those same contact points because they lack that desk. They lack that terminal to be able to log in to a digital workplace, that sort of thing. So with that, they're missing out on, it could be anything from corporate information. If they're working, for example, in a sales or customer service scope, they could be missing out on important announcements, sales, promotions, things like that. Be missing out on those sorts of things for sure. But I mean, it's also a question of reaching those folks and how do we get them that information? And your point about the idea of this organization rolling the digital workplace out to their deskless workers first, absolutely sound. What I'm finding is that a lot of organizations, if they're not rolling it out to the deskless workers first, they're rolling it out with the deskless workers in mind. You have to keep this in mind. And it's not just a single deskless population. Within an organization, you might have 4 or 5 different deskless populations more. And you have to consider how you're distilling the information to them and what information you're distilling to them. And that's just on the informational side of things. That's just getting the right information in the right hands, empowering them to do their jobs. The converse of that, or not the converse, really, it's not opposite, it's not anything, but another consideration is the idea of involving those employees within the organization. One of the key issues with deskless workers in a lot of cases is the fact that there's a very high turnover rate. And the high turnover rate comes from, in a lot of cases, the idea that they aren't aware, they don't feel, number one, involved in the organization. Number two, they don't feel recognized by the organization necessarily. And then number three, they also don't necessarily know that there are ways they can grow and advance within the organization. And these are touch points that we have to hit with folks as well. So when I mentioned earlier, like the idea of how an organization is focusing their digital workplace towards their employees, that really, starts to gel with whatever they're trying to distill to their deskless workers, and however they're trying to bring their deskless workers into the community.
Yeah, no, I love that's really interesting. So I want to delve into that a little bit, but first of all, I just wanted to do a quick shout out to Owen Pickrell, who just said hello on the chat. Great to have you with us. I think this is maybe the first time I've seen you on one of the streams, so you're welcome. And of course, if you have any questions through this for Brad or myself, we're happy to try to address them. Brad, this idea of the deskless worker, I feel like it maybe needs a little bit of delineation. You said there are multiple populations.
Yes.
I mentioned an example of which was like drivers. It could be like remote sales. It could be someone who's a digital nomad working in Portugal and the home office is in New York.
Absolutely.
It could be people working on the front line in a plant. They're working on the assembly lines down on the plant floor. Am I missing some other options there? Or?
I was a deskless worker. I was in corporate security, and at the time that I was in corporate security, and granted, this is going back 12 odd years now, but at that time, one of the things that we were prohibited from doing was having devices on the floor. We not only didn't have regular access to computers other than for report writing, but we were prohibited from accessing our devices on the floor because it was a perception thing and a safety thing, right? As I said to you, I think when we were prepping for this, if I was standing there on my phone as a security supervisor, I ran the risk of the wrong person going by me and going, geez, look at that guy. Maybe we need one less supervisor around here because that guy's not doing anything. He's looking at his phone. And it becomes a perception thing. So yeah, I mean, I think there's the idea of customer facing deskless workers. There's those folks that their job takes them out in the field and they have to actually work and interact with customers, and we have to consider what information we're targeting towards them. But there's also people who are deskless behind the scenes, and examples of those are things like your factory workers, things like that, your warehouse workers, folks that are working in kitchens and of restaurants, hospitality areas, things like that. Those are folks we have to reach as well, and they're all deskless. And then of course, one of the things that we always consider with a digital workplace is, you mentioned the idea of digital nomads, remote workers, things like that. The digital workplace is really the virtual representation of your organization online. It's your virtual office, if you will. So yeah, we have to create a home for those folks as well. And with all these different populations, we're going to get different messaging, different motivations, different targets that have to be hit in order to really, again, embrace and include those folks within the digital workplace.
That's amazing. So one of the challenges that I can think of around this, and this came up with a food manufacturer that I work with, food processing kind of organization.
Yeah.
The deskless workers I'm thinking about were on the plant floor, and they had public machines that they were on. But there was a monitor and keyboard and computer there, but different people worked on different shifts. Like you just worked out of that machine. Nobody had an email address. There was no personal email address for that. Like, how do you handle that in an enterprise? And this is probably a really newbie question for me to be asking, but like, how do you manage that when your employees don't have one of the most basic key fobs, known to anybody that's signing up for an online community or a social media site or anywhere? Like, how do you get around that?
A lot of organizations, ours included, have embraced like extended access. It's basically another way to tokenize folks and give them a username and a password without requiring them to have an email address. So that's basically the way we try and get around that. Another thing, you mentioned like a production floor, and a production floor is like a key target, that sort of thing. Like these folks that you mentioned, they were lucky enough to have terminals where maybe we can have them log into a digital workplace if they've got some sort of tokenization, and they can log in with user credentials. But another solution that really comes to the fore, especially in a lot of manufacturing organizations, is digital signage. We can put aspects of our digital workplace up on screens that are strategically placed, whether they're on the factory floor, whether they're in break rooms, transitory points like hallways, things like that. And we can provide them the information they need where they need it, without necessarily, especially like, factory floors. A lot of folks are going to be working with machinery, and they're not going to be, we don't want them on their mobile devices. We don't want them walking away from the machine to check a digital workplace terminal or anything like that. So it's great if we can get them with digital signage, that sort of thing. And they can see that information. It's being provided to them, and it's being very carefully curated as well, because that's the other thing. They don't necessarily need all the big, I think you mentioned the mothership. They don't necessarily need the mothership news, but they need to know things about machinery outages, safety checks. There's all sorts of things that they'll need to know, and they can get their mothership news later, or it can be part of that overall news stream. But that's where digital signage really starts to check the box as far as things go.
I love that idea, and the tokenized access. That makes perfect sense to me. You find another way, or with a unique identifier for that employee or whatever that gives them access to the information they need. But this kind of raises the question for me, and especially as you mentioned digital signage too. It feels like a lot of corporate thinking about that digital workplace is about pushing information to employees. But there's that question of engagement. How do you get them to log in the first place? How do you get them to share their ideas and their input and talk about what it's like to work there? How do you turn those employees from passive consumers of information into advocates for the organization?
It's not a magic bullet formula. It absolutely is not. There's all sorts of different ways you can try it, and sometimes you really have to throw things at the wall and see what sticks. So like an example that I would think of right off the top of my head is digital signage. In a lot of cases, it'll present the information. It'll present maybe a summary of the information, a little bit of syntax, but it'll also generate a QR code that the employee can scan with their mobile device. And that might be something about, it might be a QR code to take them further into the digital workplace for the story. It might be a QR code to get them started on downloading the app, that sort of thing. So that's one thing. Number two, I keep mentioning mobile, so let's talk about it. It's the idea of creating a mobile first digital workplace, something that works well on mobile devices, because that's quite often a vehicle by which we're reaching a lot of frontline workers, like maybe not necessarily a lot of high density manufacturing workers or folks who are physically driving, because we know that's not allowed in a lot of places. Right. But we're instead reaching folks who have the ability to have a mobile device with them, and that's their means of keeping in touch, that sort of thing. So creating a mobile first digital workplace that looks good, feels good, works good on mobile devices is another way to really bring people in and create those advocates. But I mean, it goes beyond that as well, because one of the things that we have to consider is what's the hook to bring people in, right? Is it just communications, or do we create some sort of back and forth? And quite often that can be things like recognition. Giving people kudos and shout outs and things like that, and allowing them to be drawn into it that way. It can be giving them safe places for, we talked about this, as you mentioned, a year ago, we're starting to look at DEIA and really the spaces and some of the advocacy that we can for those initiatives that is created within the digital workplace. Bringing folks into that sort of stuff as well is another way to create those advocates. And then, of course, there is the social aspect as well. There is I think of one particular organization, and they did what were they? They were auto providers, auto shops, and they did a corporate cooking challenge. And I keep going back to the idea of your mothership idea. And this was perceived as very much something that the mothership did. Oh, everybody at corporate got to do a cooking challenge. Well, what they did was they sent out these cooking kits to all their different shops, and they said, you're going to participate, you're going to cook, you're going to have fun with it, and you're going to post it on the digital workplace. And that's exactly what they did. So yeah, the easier you can make the digital workplace to get into and participate with, and I will mention for this particular organization, the uptake on this initiative was fantastic. And instead of seeing like maybe snide comments or hearing snide comments about, oh geez, it's just for the mothership, they were hearing, hey, thanks for including us, this was amazing. And they got some of the most amazing creative photos of people working together and enjoying the meal that was provided by the organization, because it was streamlined through the digital workplace. And it was such a great way to really involve their employees. So as I said, to kind of start off my comments, there's no magic bullet. We have to try different things and see how we can see what works for different target audiences.
I love that example so much, because you've reminded me of a project I worked on a year or two ago that was with a part of the NHS in the UK, where they were trying to start up a new community for some care workers. They were trying to create this sort of sense of belonging for them, and it was really kind of a private. It wasn't really an employee workplace, but it was kind of a private portal for them, sort of share health and well-being and sort of be better. But like one of the initial campaigns we ran, which I think was very successful in getting people involved, was also around food. And like people love to come together around food. It is a social activity. And so in that case, they were doing a recipe competition. What's your best recipe for, I can't remember what it was. It was some kind of rice dish. And like they had people coming on and were like showing, like they were doing like a cooking show, people were, they got really creative and did a lot of those things, like anything that kind of gets that sort of involvement. There was another internal community I worked with that for their launch, they did a competition. They gave everybody like a small kit of Star Wars Legos, and they said, build something with this and put a photo of it up on the online community.
Fantastic.
And it's a nice way to get everybody sort of involved and doing a creative activity and doing self-expression within that space.
Food, pets for the win. I mean, certainly anytime you want to create engagement, make a really easy way for people to upload pictures of their pets and then go to them and say, hey, we want to see your pets. And I guarantee you that I've never seen a pet campaign fail. We just finished Halloween. Halloween was yesterday. I saw all sorts of cool campaigns leading up to Halloween's digital workplace scavenger hunts, but I saw other things that really, costume contests, photo submissions, things like that, where again, you're bringing in the larger organization and creating a sense of fun. And I'm by no means implying that the digital workplace is all fun and games, but sometimes you have to create something fun in order to bring people into the digital workplace.
Yeah.
You want to know a cool story about really driving engagement? And this was one of my personal favorites.
No, I'm not interested at all. No, I'm just kidding.
Not interested? No. Okay. Well, we'll move on to something else then. No, this was one of my favorites. I remember an organization I worked with a few years ago, and they were big time into the mobile application, and they were working with, again, workers on the factory floor. They actually sent out a delegation of folks to sit down with these employees, and they had swag, they had all sorts of cool stuff. And if the employees needed help, they would sit down with them and download the app onto their phone for them and show them how to work it to start with. Like, I mean, you talk about people in the trenches and really striving to create that engagement, and that's what it was. And they hosted little parties at the various manufacturing locations they had, and they scheduled time for people to come out, learn a little bit about the app, get some swag, that sort of thing, and really invested themselves in creating user advocates. And I just thought that it seems like a lot of work, but for them, that was what worked. They literally said, I can't think of anything else working other than us going out and putting these devices in people's hands and saying, off you go. And it worked out really well for them.
So incredibly smart to do that too. I think that whole white glove approach to getting people into the platform and using the platform is I'd like to see it used a lot more in all sorts of communities, because I mean, it's just so helpful, especially like I think that organizations tend to assume a certain level of digital literacy for everybody,
Mm-hmm.
but it's widely variable. You could have young users that have never downloaded an app, as well as old users.
100%. Yeah.
And so having people whose work is going there in person or being on a live call and helping them through the process of doing those things, that can make such a big difference in terms
It
of
can.
adoption.
Yeah. Well, and it comes down to knowing your audience as well. Like we've talked a little bit abstractly about the idea of different audiences, but knowing your audience. And as you mentioned, if we're working, and this is by no means again saying that all factory workers can't download apps, but you may have a technical gap in some cases, right? And if you actually take steps to bridge those gaps and make the path, we've talked about it a couple of times now, make the path to the digital workplace as easy and as non-intrusive as possible, you're going to get people adopting that. And it's just understanding what your audience was. And in this case, yeah, you hit it on the head. These folks saw a little bit of a technical gap with some of their folks, and they're like, you know what? If you don't know how to download it, we're gonna sit down with you and show you how to do it. And they shared some really good stories about people that were like, oh, this is great. Oh, this is excellent. I can use this now. And it was just such a nice way to do it. And they also appreciated the attention again from, let's put quotes around it, corporate. They appreciated the idea that someone from corporate was coming out to show them how to do this stuff. I just thought that was both heartwarming and really, really practical.
It trumpets that message that you are important to us.
Exactly. Well, and right. Going back to your earlier question, how do we bring people into the digital workplace? We have to give it a sense of importance, and we have to give those folks a sense of importance, and we have to make those two gel. That's the thing. Like, we have to make folks realize that they are important within the organization, and that their contributions matter. So going back to the idea of like kudos and recognition and things like that, and really bubbling up some of that stuff, giving folks a place to express themselves a little bit. That's the sort of stuff that really can drive home and really give the folks a sense of involvement with the organization. I mean, how cool would it be to be? I worked years and years ago at a tourist attraction here in Ontario, and I very nearly made a career out of it. And this is, of course, back in the days before digital workplaces, but I very nearly made a career out of it. And the reason I did was because I knew I was valued. I knew there were opportunities, and I knew how to achieve those opportunities. And I was with that organization for 5 years. So imagine someone who's working in a Deskless sort of scenario right now. Maybe they're a retail employee, something along those lines. But they're able to see logically, because they're exposed to the digital workplace, a path that takes them through the ranks and eventually has them working in some sort of, not necessarily dream job, but definitely an elevated position within the organization. And that all is cultivated because they can see that career pathing through the digital workplace. Like, that's one of the other hooks, is the idea of creating a path to success within that organization. Right? I mentioned high turnover. We can get rid of some of that turnover, or we can turn it over, if you will, by simply allowing these folks to see that there are paths within the organization, and we care enough to help you develop that. And again, that comes down to a big path of information coming through that digital workplace.
Yeah, and so access to those kinds of abilities to upskill or to help enable you to make it on that career path. There's two things that have come up in our conversation so far that I just want to underscore for those people that are listening here. Functions of the digital workplace around being a place where you can make meaningful choices about your career, and as places where self-expression is possible. The digital workplace, while it's not all fun and games, as you said, it should not be the enemy of fun.
No, it shouldn't.
Yeah, of course you've got serious reasons for people to be on the platform. There are practical reasons for it, but there's got to be some equivalent of a digital water cooler around there where people can meet and be connected, gain trust with each other. You need that provision for the creation of social capital within your workplace.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing. Like, quite often, and I see so many channels in digital workplaces called the water cooler or the hangout or whatever the case may be. Yeah. But I mean, that is something that we still want to intrinsically have. Like, when the pandemic I know I'm going to mention it, but when it dropped in 2020, Igloo went full remote at the drop of a hat. And I mean, we should have, obviously, because we are enabling remote work. We're a digital workplace company. But the fact that we were able to do that, and the fact that we were still able to maintain the awesome corporate culture that we have without those real-time meeting spaces was testament to the fact that we drink our own Kool-Aid. We have a digital workplace, we use it, and that became our primary vehicle. And that is really, really powerful. So think about that with any other organization, creating connections through that digital water cooler sort of thing. And granted, again, it's, as we've said a couple of times, it's not all fun and games, but it does give a little bit of that transactional bump to the idea of people wanting to engage with the digital workplace and wanting still to feel close to their fellow workers. And that's where it kind of extends a lot, in a lot of cases, to that idea of that remote worker who's removed from the organization, not necessarily because of job function, but they're removed basically because of geography or choice of, voluntarily working from home, that sort of thing. They still want to feel connected. And a great way to do that, it can be enabled through the digital workplace again.
I'd like to talk about a segment of the deskless worker that maybe you wouldn't necessarily think of as the deskless worker, but I think they frequently are, and that's the executive leadership team.
True. Yeah.
And I think my past experiences, and I'm curious about your current perspective on this, has been that one of the most stubborn against adopting digital workplace practices, they're fully ready to endorse it, but do they actually use it, is the executive leader within the organization. What's been your experience around this? Like, is it still, like, again, we can't be monolithic. There are, of course, chief people officers and CEOs who are avidly using, digital workplace experiences. But I always felt like that was kind of the minority who were there.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I'd say it's the minority necessarily. I mean, it certainly is a challenge. One thing I will say about executives who really get into the idea of the digital workplace and use it avidly, they hit it out of the park when they do. And I think it becomes such a question of, again, showing them the value. Like, why do you want to engage with the digital workplace? Why do you want to maybe record a video message, that sort of thing? Why do you want to distill all your announcements through the digital workplace as opposed to emails, as opposed to a messaging tool or something like that? And if you can highlight that value to them and get them on board and show them that their participation is absolutely critical to your success, I find there's a lot of adoption that happens with that. And, I mentioned the idea of, I can think of a number of executive leaders who are recording regular chat points, regular updates, and, not just, okay, here's the latest on the corporation for the week ending. They're not doing that. They're doing like, hey, how's it going? It was a sunny weekend and I had a great time. I went fishing this weekend. That was great. By the way, here's some things that are going on. By the way, here's some kudos. These teams did really well. And we've got leaders that are doing that. You're right in that it's a challenge, but it really comes back to, again, tying that value to why we're doing this. As you mentioned, they're great advocates for the idea. Everyone should use the digital workplace. And then it's like, except me. But that's not, if
my executive assistant will post for me.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. And when it comes down to it, if they're too busy, right. And that can happen sometimes. Well, ghostwriting capabilities. If nothing else, you can make the message appear as if it's authored, and I know it's not necessarily authored, but maybe it's authored and approved by the person. We're publishing as them because maybe they don't necessarily have the time. But I will say that when user populations see the executive getting involved, it's definitely reflected in kind. And it's something we should really be trying to advocate for as much as possible within organizations, is get someone, it doesn't have to be all your leaders, but get some of your leaders involved, because that really drives people to say, hey, again, perception of value.
Well, I'm heartened to hear that it's not the majority who are struggling with that adoption question, because it is so important. I think it's relatively easy to make a case for like what's in it for me to post and to be active, within the digital workplace. And I often feel like digital workplace initiatives as well as online community initiatives have a hard time getting funding, precisely because executive teams don't spend any time there, doing things. So I'm hopeful that world is changing, based on what you're saying there, to get us to that place where we see a willingness to fund because they're seeing the value of what's there, and a lot of it has to do with helping them see what's in it for them. And I think to a large extent, like a lot of executive corporate culture has been about face-to-face interaction.
Yeah,
having that. So there's a little bit of an internal change of heart that's got to happen for somebody to want to start using digital tools.
Well, and another thing that it comes back to, like, you're absolutely correct. A lot of executives, it's face-to-face interaction and things like that. But one of the things that execs are great at is using their phones. So again, if you have that mobile-friendly, mobile-first digital workplace, and you can put that on that device that's in their hands, you maximize the chances of them engaging with that. And if you can make access to that easier, if you can make, again, the messaging and everything really targeted and show them the value, that's quite often it's getting analytics in front of them and saying, look at the uptick here. You did this video post, I badgered you, and you did this video post, and look at all the hits on it, look at the comments. And all of a sudden that becomes really important as well. But they're also big mobile users. So just being able to put that on the device in their hands and say, there's your digital workplace, that helps you get over that gulf a little bit too.
I love that point about I'll call it enabled ego surfing for the leader.
That's a good term.
See how many hits you got, how many likes and comments came up.
Yeah,
that's wonderful. Yeah, but yeah. I mean, it's true. Like, we all want to know that we're heard, and I think especially for someone who's been put in a leadership position in an organization, they need to have something of that validation that this approach that they've taken has been effective.
Absolutely. And that's it. Like, if I can show you as an executive metrics that say you are reaching people and you're making a difference, and it doesn't have to necessarily be likes and comments, it can be views. It can just be the fact that, hey, here's all the views, here's the all the email opens of the notifications that went out, here's the views of the actual article, here's the views of the video that you aired. Can you tell them a little warm on video? I love video for this sort of thing, right? Yeah, if I can show them that, then the value states itself. Okay, I'm reaching these people. Great, this is fantastic. It's something that really writes itself as long as we create those inroads. And sometimes, yeah, it does take a little bit of convincing, but ultimately they're part of an organization that's invested in this tool to make work better for their employees, and they are also employees of that organization. So it really is incumbent to have them engage as much as they possibly can.
Brad, this has been great. I feel like the time has passed all too quickly through the conversation, but just some really wonderful insights, I think, coming out of this. And I thank you, for all that you've been able to share on this.
My pleasure.
One of the things that strikes me that, coming back to the very beginning of our conversation, that idea that 80% of the workforce is now deskless, that then implies, and I wonder if Igloo has sort of leaned into this terminology, as opposed to mobile first, is it deskless first design for a digital workplace?
I think so in a lot of cases. Certainly, like we've released a new digital workplace solution recently called Flex, and it is very much geared toward deskless workers and being mobile first, that sort of thing. Absolutely. But yeah, it has to enter the conversation. We still get a lot of organizations that are very firmly desked, right? They have employee distribution, and it may be across multiple offices, multiple geographies, whatever the case may be, but everybody's physically sitting in a terminal able to do that. And we can do that, and we've done that really, really well for years. But understanding that you've got this larger population out there, one of the key things that I would be looking at if I were in the position to be purchasing a digital workplace solution right now, I would be looking at how does it enable me to address my mobile and my deskless population? That would be a huge question for me, because again, you want that to reach the multitudes. You want it to reach as many people within your organizations as possible. So yeah, there's a big shift right now to the idea of reaching those folks that we are traditionally are much harder to reach.
Yeah, no, I love that. One of my many business interests that I have is around a startup called Talent Led that I'm doing in conjunction with my dear friend Ilker Council. And that's been our entire approach to thinking about an application for engaging talent to potentially bring into the workplace. That it's got to be a mobile first experience.
Yep.
Just pure accessibility. People are, if you want to enable them to chat, to have conversations, to express themselves, to be considered for a job, it's probably going to happen on a small screen first.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, and we're seeing a lot of people that are doing onboarding and pre-boarding. Like, onboarding's always been an integral part of the digital workplace, but imagine that you can do that in a mobile context. And imagine you can maybe even do that before they join the organization. We're starting to see a lot of folks that are doing that. But, we talked about how do you bring people into the digital workplace. One of the things that went unsaid there, and I'll say it now, is you bake it into them as soon as possible in their employment journey. If they onboard through the digital workplace, that becomes a transactional part. I'll just anecdotally, I onboarded with Igloo in a physical office, and the majority of my onboarding journey, other than interactions with my peers, was covered in our own digital workplace. And to this day, our digital workplace is the first thing I log on to every day, and it's the last thing I log off of every night. I'm not in it 24/7 or 8 hours a day, as the case may be, but it's always up on one of my tabs because it has become an incredibly useful tool for me. And I've seen that echoed in so many organizations, where the sooner that we bake that into the employee journey, the easier it is to say to those employees, hey, check the digital workplace. Oh, you'll find that in the digital workplace, and enable them to self-serve. And that's a big win for anyone who's looking to implement a digital workplace.
Well, I can't think of a better note to leave that on, Brad. The conversation, as always, has been terrific. And I'm wondering if you want to just kind of say a word or two about Igloo, and maybe Kalisa can drop a link up there if somebody wants to learn a little bit more about exploring Igloo as a solution for their digital workplace.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I did provide the link to igloosoftware.com to Kalisa. I mean, we are, as I mentioned, we've released a new product called Flex, which is focused on that mobile first, that deskless solution, and certainly check it out if you want to. We're doing all sorts of great things at Igloo, digital signages, all sorts of cool stuff to check out on our site. And of course, reach out if you've got any questions. But Todd, thank you very much for having me on. It's been a great time.
It's been a joy as always, Brad. I always enjoy our conversations. You're always bringing new insights and ideas to the table. So looking forward to having you back again in December. As we do our ugly sweater party. And in the meantime, for those of you who have tuned in, thank you so much for spending the better part of an hour with us. I hope that you've gotten some value out of it. Would love to hear from you. And as always, if you are checking this out on LinkedIn or on YouTube, always appreciate comments, shares, subscriptions to the Clocktower Advisors YouTube channel or to Clocktower Advisors company page on LinkedIn. So with that being said, I hope that all of you have a wonderful, relaxing weekend. Do take time for yourself to recharge those batteries, because you are important and valued and wonderful. And we're glad you're in the world. And come back here in a couple of weeks as we'll have on the 15th, Muja Vali, again, performance marketing expert extraordinaire, who's going to be coming in and sharing some tips about community growth hacks. So until then, we'll see you later. Kalisa, let's roll the credits. See you, Brad.
See you, Todd. Thanks, folks.